Aloha, namaste. This is Radha, and I just wanted to make a quick video on Mars's move back into Gemini. This is January 20th, and he is moving this evening, a little after 7 p.m. Hawaii time, back into the sign of Gemini, where he was before. He's been in Cancer since October 20th. And he began his retrograde cycle and is now moving all the way back into that sign that we already had him in, which is the sign of our ideas and our information and our communication. Now, Mars in Gemini is a place where we can get really argumentative really quick. Gemini is information, it's ideas, it's facts, and it's really like data because information needs to be looked at from a wider perspective, right? We need to look at much information before we can come to some kind of conclusion about it. And often when Mars is in Gemini, we're a little bit quick to make a decision. We'll see like one piece of information and be like, that is pointing to that, and have this sort of right and wrong perspective about it. Because Mars is the planet of war. He's the planet of aggression and anger and action. And he wants to know what to act on. This is that. Okay, I'm gonna, act on that thing. But in the sign of Gemini, he's not actually very physically active. He's more with his words. So we see anger, we see arguments, we see fighting happening through our language, through our communication. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can see. This is just a little bit after 7 p.m. here in Hawaii, where he jumps back into Gemini. Now, of course, he's retrograde. So retrograde, and I say this whenever I talk about retrograde, but I'll say it again just for those who haven't heard before. Retrograde's an apparent action, right? He's not actually moving backwards in the sky. The planets don't start moving backwards. What happens is that they slow down so much that from our perspective here on Earth, which is how we're experiencing all of these grahas, all of these orbs in space, is that he slows down so much, he actually moves into the constellation prior to the one that he was in before. So Gemini, of course, comes before Cancer. What's really beautiful about retrograde cycles is that it gives us a chance to kind of do a do-over. We had Mars in Gemini in the late summer and early fall. We already had our vitriol, we already had our anger and our rightness and our arguments. And then he moved into Cancer where he's debilitated. October 20th is when he moved in here. And this is where we get really weepy and really like resentful, and we stack up our resentments because we don't want to break connection, because Cancer is the sign of unconditional love, and we just want to love people through it. And then, of course, that builds up to the point where we get passive aggressive. So our anger comes out in passive aggressive ways. We don't have a clear channel for it. Mars needs a channel for his energy. It is, through sports, through competitions, through warfare, through physically disciplining activities that Mars really is able to shine. And when he's in this sign, that's a water sign, an emotional sign, and then this sign, which is an intellectual, mental sign, we don't get as much physical activity. We're not channeling our passion into something. And of course, with Gemini, there's much more of an outlet. It's a masculine sign and it's ideas and words. So we channel it into what? Internet typing, warfare on the internet, our anger about different ideas. And we fight with people perhaps that we're in relationship with, or people that we don't even know that well, because we want to be right. And becoming right is then more important than being happy. Now with Cancer, the right and wrong doesn't come up. We want to be loved. We want to be loved and we want to love, and we don't understand why there's this anger and things that are keeping us from that love. But with Gemini, oh, we understand. We understand perfectly well. I'm right, you're wrong, and that's the problem, right? And this is heightened by the fact that Mercury is in Sagittarius, because Sagittarius is the land of our beliefs. So this is where we really feel a strong right. It's not just that little piece of fact or information that flew up in Gemini. It's rooted in a deep belief system here in Sagittarius that absolutely proves that little fact is right. That little piece of information that we saw perhaps from some, tabloid magazine or something, or a post from somebody, that had to be right because it's confirming what we already believe. So we already have the fact that Mercury is not in great dignity over here in Sagittarius, and he is the ruler of Gemini, right? He's the ruler of Gemini, and there's this drishti going on between the two of them now. Now, this isn't going to last very long. Mercury is about to go into Capricorn by the end of the week, so we're going to see, we're going to see that shift, but then there's going to be a one-way drishti, and it won't happen right away. We have, I think, about the 6th or 7th of February, we have Mercury. You can see he's already kind of moving in, and the sun is moving into the drishti from Mars. What we have here is an 8th house drishti. It's a one-way drishti. So instead of it being across from each other where they're both giving the energy, where Mercury is giving to Mars, here Mercury had a lot more energy influence because he's also the ruler of Mars here. And he's in Sagittarius, and he's sharing. Now he's the ruler, but he's getting closer to the sun. He's becoming combust. We don't feel as heard. Mercury in Capricorn is quieter, which can be a huge blessing for this situation that's going on, because we might be more inclined towards hesitation in our communication. Retrograde also, and I started to speak about this, also brings that hesitation and that reflection, particularly when he's retrograding back into a sign we've already experienced the full gamut of. We've already had the full run of Mercury through Gemini. And he's just in this star of Purnavasu, which is repeating patterns. So we have this opportunity to look at the patterns we're repeating. I mean, here in the US on January 20th, I'm not going to jump the chart back to that time, but this is the day that he's actually moving back into Gemini. We have this inauguration of Donald Trump. And this is his second term in presidency, right? We had this period of time where Joe Biden was president, and now we're going back to something that we already experienced before. And many people are like, didn't we already do this? How is this happening again? And that's a really good question. And I bet that it's showing up in a lot of ways in your own personal world. Like, how is this same relational problem I'm having happening again? How is the same situation at my job happening again? How is the same financial dynamic happening again? Well, because we haven't moved out of that loop, and we might be more evolved in it than we believe. We might have reached actually another level of it that we don't understand fully, that can be difficult to understand. But if we're able to get out of the trigger of right and wrong and that immediate call to action and anger that can so often happen, then we have a chance to really reflect deeper. Like, why is this happening again? What is this showing us about ourselves as individuals, about the relationships we get in, about the dynamics we put ourselves in jobs, and about our society as a whole? And how are we reacting to big societal issues, for example? And are we bypassing our own life in favor of, having something to say on something big and global that we don't have as much say over as we would like to think we do? Perhaps the say that we had was along the way and in our own lives and in our own daily interactions. And we chose to ignore those moments when we did have a say. And now the bigger thing is happening, and we don't have much we can do about it. And so these are ways we can really reflect when Mars is retrograde. And when we see these planets in Capricorn, we can see there's this much more diligent physical activity that's happening where we're committed to practical action. And so perhaps our nose is a little more to the grindstone, and we're actually going to put some efforts into something. Shravana, the particular star that they're in here, this is about listening carefully. Maybe we can listen instead of just speaking immediately our opinion. Maybe we get triggered, but we hold our trigger for a moment, and we sit with why we're triggered and what it's pointing to in the greater world. So these retrograde moments can be really powerful. And we'll see that he goes direct again on February 23rd, and it's still in Purnavasu. He never goes back into Ardra. So we have this real opportunity to look at our patterns in communication, particularly. Where do we really make ourselves right, and therefore someone else having to be wrong? When we recognize a truth in something, it doesn't immediately make the opposite of that wrong. And when we can hold multiple truths and multiple realities at one time, that's when we not only develop true compassion, which we'll have an opportunity to practice April 2nd when he goes back into Cancer, really notice how we can be compassionate towards ourselves and others. But it also gives us an opportunity to have a wider scope, a better understanding, and to really move into the next layers of our evolution around that area of our life. So I do these reports every week for all the 12 signs where I go through the transits of that week. And sometimes there's a major transit like Mars moving back into Gemini or Mercury moving into Capricorn, as there is this week. And I talk about how that's going to be different for each of us based on what Mars rules. What is Gemini for you? For Aries people, Mars is their ruling planet, and it's also the ruler of their 8th house, which has to do with metaphysics and the occult, or things that are outside the norm, taboo, even things like conspiracies, going into the 3rd house in retrograde. This is a researching opportunity. This is a chance to learn something new. Will it be something that's true and clever and for sure right that you want to argue about? Possibly, but it could also be something that needs a little more time for you to sit with and marinate. It might be pointing to a truth without being completely and wholly true. And that nuance of information is where Gemini is so brilliant. That's where the brilliance lies, is the understanding of nuance, the understanding of all the different facts needing to be looked at from a whole, and that it isn't always one conclusion that can be drawn. That there's often from what perspective you're standing, just like the fact that retrograde is not actually a planet moving backwards. We have to understand that we're standing on the earth. And that is why we're experiencing that. If we don't understand that, we don't understand anything that we're learning in astrology. And that's why there's, so many people who continue to use this sort of Western tropical zodiac, even though it's 24 degrees off, because there's not an actual understanding of where we are and what we're looking at. And that's true with almost all the information that people take in. We see that people don't understand the source from which it came. They don't understand all the dynamics of everything that happened. And it's not your fault or my fault or anyone's fault. It's the way that we've come into this chaotic age that we're in right now, where there's a lot of missing pieces. There's a lot of holes. There's been a lot of agendas, if you will, throughout time that have changed our capacity to understand information, from the very way we've been raised and the way our society runs, to commercials on TV, to constantly being sold things that have changed the way that we're able to actually access and look at information, not to mention the actual holes of missing information that make it difficult for us to draw those lines and really understand from where something came. And so this is something that we're really gonna, if you're ready, if you're there and you're ready to kind of move out of this black and white thinking, and you really want to move forward into something that's more compelling and interesting, and actually going to bring out a greater argument, if you will, something you could write in a paper or an article, or some kind of communication you want to bring forward when he moves into this forward motion, February 23rd. This is a time to output, right? This is a time to output that what you've been reflecting upon, whether it's personal, whether it's political, whether it's social, whether it has to do with your job and, something you want to say to your boss or to your partner. But you'll have the time to think about it and reflect upon it and make sure that you're really understanding things and owning that it's your perspective. Owning, I'm standing here and this is how it seems for me. This is my experience. And probably someone standing somewhere else is having a different experience, just like someone in the Southern Hemisphere is not experiencing winter right now. And so this is something I do. And I do it in my Patreon group, patreon.com, Radha Home Astrology. You can sign up for Cosmically Aligned. That's my actual member group, where you get these breakdowns for all 12 signs. You get to see what each of these transits mean for you weekly, the new moons and full moons, anytime a planet moves into a sign or begins a retrograde cycle. I talk about what it means for you personally, and then just the moon's shifts as it goes through the different signs every week. So I hope to see you again soon. Thanks for listening, and you are welcome to like, comment, or share if you feel so called. Namaste.